I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my parents who disowned me 13 years ago just showed up in a rented Porsche to claim my $1.9 million inheritance. Before I tell you about the exact moment their greedy smiles shattered into a million pieces, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning of the will reading felt heavy. The air inside Mr. Sterling's law office smelled strongly of lemon floor polish, old paper, and the bitter black coffee brewing in the corner of the waiting room. It was a freezing Tuesday in late November. The sky outside the frosted glass windows hung low and gray, promising a brutal snowstorm by nightfall. I sat alone in a stiff, high-backed leather chair, staring at the brass nameplate screwed into the heavy oak door of the inner office. Arthur Sterling, attorney at law. He was my grandmother's lawyer, a man who possessed the rare ability to look entirely unbothered by anything happening around him. I arrived an hour early. I needed the quiet. I needed to steady my breathing and mentally prepare for what was coming. The receptionist, a kind older woman named Betty who had known my grandmother for decades, offered me a plate of shortbread cookies. I declined. My stomach was tied in tight, painful knots. The silence of the waiting room broke with the aggressive roar of a high-performance engine echoing from the icy parking lot below. I stood up, walked over to the second-story window, and pulled back the heavy blinds. A sleek, midnight blue Porsche Panamera slid recklessly into the parking space right next to my 10-year-old, salt-stained Ford truck. The driver cut the engine. The doors swung open. My father, Richard, stepped out first. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat draped perfectly over his broad shoulders, his silver hair neatly styled despite the mountain wind. Next came my mother, Susan. She stepped carefully onto the black ice, clutching a designer handbag tightly against her chest, her face buried behind oversized dark sunglasses. And finally, climbing out of the back seat was Elijah, my older brother, the family's undisputed golden child. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, tapping away on his latest smartphone, a heavy silver watch catching the dull morning light. Seeing them sent a cold shock straight down my spine. I had not spoken a single word to these people in over a decade. They had not called when I was hospitalized with pneumonia 3 years ago. They had not sent a single message when I finally graduated. They had actively ignored my grandmother, Eleanor, for the last 5 years of her life, claiming the mountain drive was too inconvenient for their busy schedules. Yet, here they were, marching up the icy steps to the law office like they owned the entire town. The heavy oak door of the waiting room creaked open. The icy wind rushed in with them. My father walked in first, stomping the snow off his expensive leather shoes. He stopped in the center of the room, smoothing his silk tie, and let his eyes sweep across the cheap waiting room furniture before they finally landed on me. "Well," my father said. His voice was incredibly loud, designed to take up all the air in the room. He flashed a brilliant, entirely hollow smile that did not reach his eyes. "Look who is here." I did not stand up. I kept my hands resting flat on my knees. I looked straight at him. He had aged. Deep lines framed his mouth, and his posture was slightly stiffer, but he still carried that overbearing, suffocating confidence. My mother stepped out from behind his broad frame. She pushed her sunglasses up onto her head and offered a tight, polite nod. It was the exact same nod she used to give the grocery store cashiers. "Joshua, we figured you would come." "It is my grandmother's will reading," I said flatly, keeping my voice low and steady. "Why wouldn't I be here?" Elijah smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and crossed his arms. "Just making sure you got the memo, little brother. It is a big day for the family. We have a lot of important business to handle." Hearing him use the word family made my jaw clench. Before I could respond, the heavy oak door to the inner office swung open. Mr. Sterling stood there, holding a thick manila folder. He looked at my parents, then at me. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Elijah, Joshua, please, come inside and take a seat." We filed into the small, wood-paneled office. The room was dominated by a massive mahogany desk. My parents immediately claimed the 2 plush leather chairs positioned directly in front of the lawyer. Elijah quickly pulled up a side chair, dragging it across the carpet so he could sit right next to my father. I chose the simple wooden chair sitting by the window, putting as much physical space between us as the room allowed. My father leaned back comfortably, clasping his hands over his stomach. He looked around the office, acting like a wealthy investor evaluating a struggling startup. "So," he began lightly, turning his attention to Mr. Sterling, "that mountain lodge of my mother's, quite a substantial piece of property. Tourism is booming up in those mountains lately. With the right renovations, some serious capital injection, we could really turn that place into a massive family business. We were just discussing the expansion potential on the drive up from the city." My mother chimed in, leaning forward with sudden enthusiasm. "Oh, absolutely. Could be something really special, Arthur. We have so many wonderful ideas to modernize the cabins and upgrade the dining facilities." I sat in my corner and just watched them. I did not feel the sudden burst of rage I had anticipated. Instead, I felt a bizarre, clinical detachment. I was watching a performance. They were talking about my grandmother's home, the sanctuary she poured her blood and sweat into, the exact place that saved my life when they threw me out, like it was just a distressed asset waiting for a corporate flip. Mr. Sterling did not look up from his files. He deliberately adjusted his reading glasses. "We are gathered here today to execute the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance. I will read the legal document in its entirety. I must ask that you hold all questions and comments until the end of the reading." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Of course, Arthur. Proceed. We are all ears." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He opened the folder. He began to read. The early parts of the will were simple and highly specific. My grandmother left a $5,000 donation to the local volunteer fire department. She left $10,000 to the town library fund. She left small, generous sums to the 2 local women who had helped her clean the lodge during the brutal winter seasons. With every name Mr. Sterling read, he revealed another piece of the quiet, beautiful, connected life my grandmother had built. A life my parents knew absolutely nothing about. "And now," Mr. Sterling said, turning a heavy parchment page, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet room, "to the primary asset, the mountain lodge, the surrounding 70 acres of timberland, and all associated business accounts." My father sat up noticeably straighter. Elijah leaned in, his eyes wide. My mother held her breath. The silence in the small office was suffocating. Mr. Sterling looked directly at me. Then he slowly shifted his gaze to my parents. He took a slow, measured breath. Little did my family know, the very next words out of his mouth were going to ignite a fire they could never extinguish. To truly understand the absolute audacity of my parents sitting in that law office, demanding control of my grandmother's legacy, you have to understand exactly what happened the year I turned 19. I was sitting at the massive glass dining room table in my parents' pristine, minimalist suburban home. It was late November 13 years ago. My bags were already packed and sitting by the front door. I had not packed them myself. My father had violently thrown my clothes into a duffel bag 20 minutes prior. We had been arguing for months. In truth, the tension had been building my entire life, but it reached a boiling point during my sophomore year of college. My father was a senior executive at a cutthroat investment firm. Elijah was already following perfectly in his footsteps, landing a highly competitive junior analyst role straight out of business school. Elijah was chasing a massive salary, bragging at every family dinner about his incoming bonuses and his inevitable promotion. In my father's house, your worth as a human being was measured strictly by your earning potential, your job title, and the brand of car you drove. I was different. I wanted to study forestry and environmental science. I wanted to work outdoors with my hands. The catalyst for our final fight was a simple paper brochure I had brought home for a summer conservation internship in the state parks. "You are throwing your entire life away," my father had screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red as he slammed his fist down on the marble kitchen island. The coffee cups rattled. I am not paying a premium college fund for you to go plant trees and live in a canvas tent like some vagrant. You will switch your major to finance tomorrow morning, or you are completely cut off. Do you hear me? I stood my ground, though my hands were shaking. I tried to reason with him. I told him I did not care about the money or the luxury cars. I just wanted to do something that felt real to me. My mother had stood by the stainless steel sink, meticulously polishing a wine glass. She never raised her voice. She did not have to. She delivered her blows quietly. Joshua, please stop being so incredibly dramatic. Your brother just got a huge promotion at the firm. Everyone at the country club is asking about him. Why can't you just apply yourself and be more like Elijah? You are actively choosing to embarrass this family. That was the night the final verdict came down. My father walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, his jaw locked tight. He pointed a rigid finger directly at my chest. If you are going to live your life as a failure, my father said, his voice dropping into a cold, terrifyingly calm register, you will not be doing it under my roof. Get out. Now. I looked at my mother, silently begging for her to intervene. She deliberately looked away, focusing entirely on an invisible speck of dust on the countertop. Elijah was leaning casually against the bottom of the grand staircase, drinking a protein shake. He actually smiled. He raised his cup and gave me a mocking little salute. I grabbed my duffel bag by the front door. I had exactly $80 in my checking account and a half-empty tank of gas in my rusted Honda Civic. I drove blindly through the night. The heater in the car was broken, and the freezing rain quickly turned into heavy snow the higher I climbed into the mountain elevation. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I could not stop driving. Around 3 in the morning, shivering uncontrollably, I pulled into a brightly lit gas station. My hands were shaking so badly from the cold and the shock that I could barely dial the numbers on the payphone. I called the only person on earth I could think of. Hello? A sleepy, raspy voice answered on the third ring. Grandma, I choked out. The tears I had been desperately fighting off finally broke. I leaned my forehead against the cold metal of the phone booth. It's Josh. I don't have anywhere to go. Where are you right now? She asked. There was no hesitation, no deep sigh of annoyance, no demanding questions about what I had done wrong to provoke my father. 3 hours later, I carefully navigated my sliding car up the steep, winding dirt road that led to the Pine Ridge Lodge. Grandma Eleanor was already waiting for me on the wraparound wooden porch. She was wrapped in a thick wool shawl, holding a steaming thermos of hot black coffee. She walked down the snowy steps, pulled me into a fierce hug that smelled intensely of pine needles and wood smoke, and simply said, "Let's get you inside by the fire, honey." She gave me the spare room on the 3rd floor of the main cabin. I ended up staying in that room for almost an entire year. She never once sat me down to interrogate me. She never asked me to explain my side of the story or justify my choices. She simply put me to work. I chopped firewood in the freezing mornings, fixed leaky copper pipes, painted the guest cabins, and helped her check in the tired hikers and tourists who came seeking refuge from the loud city. Through the relentless, hard physical work, she slowly rebuilt me. She showed me, through her daily actions, that a man's worth isn't found in his bank account or his title, but in his character and his willingness to help others. Eventually, I saved enough money from working at the lodge to finish my degree at an affordable state school. I moved out to a nearby city, secured a solid job in park management, and made sure to drive up and visit her every single weekend without fail. During those entire 13 years, my parents never called. They never checked to see if I was sleeping on the street. Elijah blocked my phone number the day I left. I was effectively dead to them. And now, here they were, sitting comfortably in Mr. Sterling's office. Their eyes were wide with dollar signs, acting like we were just one big happy family, ready to cash a massive inheritance check together. They had absolutely no idea about the trap that was already set and waiting for them. The blaring warning signs that my family was actively plotting something sinister started exactly 1 week before the will reading, right in the middle of my grandmother's funeral. It was a brutally cold, crisp Friday afternoon. The local graveyard sat on a high hill overlooking the entire valley. The turnout for the service was massive. Grandma Eleanor had touched nearly every life in that small mountain town. The baker who delivered fresh bread every morning, the town mechanic, the county sheriff. They were all there, standing shoulder to shoulder in the bitter wind, paying their respects. I was standing quietly near the casket, feeling entirely numb, when a shiny black SUV slowly pulled up to the wrought iron cemetery gates. The doors opened. Out stepped my parents and Elijah. They were dressed in impeccable, expensive black mourning clothes. My mother even wore a dark lace veil over her face. I watched in pure, unadulterated disgust as they immediately began working the crowd. My mother dramatically dabbed her completely dry eyes with a silk tissue, eagerly accepting heartfelt condolences from townspeople she had never met in her life. My father aggressively shook hands with a grim, serious expression plastered on his face. They were putting on an absolute masterclass in fake grief, treating the funeral like a high-stakes networking event. After the burial service, people gathered back at the main lodge for warm food and coffee. The place was packed. I was standing in the back kitchen, scrubbing out a large coffee urn, when David walked in. David was a guy I went to high school with down in the city. He now worked as a highly aggressive real estate broker in the expanding mountain region. He was always a bit too slick, a bit too eager to make a quick buck off anyone he met. "Hey, Josh," David said, leaning casually against the stainless steel counter. He looked around the kitchen before lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Listen, man, I know today is really tough for you, but I was just talking to your dad out on the porch." I stopped scrubbing the pot. I turned to look at him, wiping my hands on a towel. "Oh, really? What did Richard have to say?" "He is a smart guy, your dad," David said, tapping his temple knowingly. "Look, running a massive lodge like this is brutal, backbreaking work. The profit margins are incredibly tight. The winter maintenance is endless. Your dad mentioned that he and your brother have some serious capital ready to inject into the property. If you end up inheriting a piece of this place, you should really think about letting them buy you out. Let the seasoned professionals handle the heavy lifting, you know? You can take a massive paycheck, buy a nice house, and just relax." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. "David, do me a huge favor and get out of my kitchen right now." He immediately held up both hands in surrender, taking a step back. Hey, just trying to help you out, man. Don't be stupid about this. It's just business." An hour later, I desperately needed to escape the crowded room. I walked out the side door onto the back deck to get some freezing air into my lungs. The wooden deck wrapped around the far side of the building, completely shielded from view by giant, ancient spruce trees. As I turned the sharp corner, I distinctly heard Elijah's voice. He was standing near the edge of the snowy woods, a cigarette hanging loosely out of his mouth, holding his phone tightly to his ear. He was talking fast, his tone aggressive and impatient. "No, listen to me, Vance," Elijah said, pacing frantically back and forth in the snow. "I already told you the zoning for the property is already fully commercial. The acreage is prime real estate. Once the old lady's legal paperwork clears next week at the lawyer's office, we are taking total control of the board. My dad has all the financial leverage we need. We are going to bulldoze this rotting main cabin, put up the luxury resort framework before the ground freezes, and flip the whole package to your development group by spring. Just have the damn contracts ready to sign." I froze mid-step. My blood ran ice cold in my veins. They did not want to run a family business. They did not care about the legacy. They wanted to tear down the only home that ever truly mattered to me, pave over the forest, and sell the dirt to a faceless corporate developer for a massive payout. Elijah was actively brokering the backroom deal while my grandmother's guests were still eating in the dining room. I took a slow step backward, but the old wooden floorboards creaked loudly under my heavy winter boots. Elijah spun around instantly, his eyes narrowing into hostile slits as he saw me standing there. He quickly dropped the cigarette and aggressively crushed it under his expensive Italian leather shoe. He ended the call without saying another word to the person on the line. Snooping around, Josh? Elijah asked, a nasty, condescending smile slowly spreading across his face. Who is Vance? I asked, forcing my voice to remain completely steady. Just a buddy from the city, Elijah said smoothly. He walked purposefully past me, intentionally bumping his shoulder hard against mine. Don't worry your little head about it. The adults in the room are going to handle things from here on out. You just go back to washing the dishes. I stood alone on the freezing deck, looking out at the jagged mountain peaks. I realized right then that this was not just a disagreement about money anymore. This was a war for survival, and I had to find a way to win it. The agonizing night before the scheduled meeting at Mr. Sterling's office, the mountain was suddenly hit by a brutal, blinding snowstorm. The heavy wind howled aggressively through the tall pines, violently rattling the thick glass windows of the main lodge. I was sitting alone in the expansive, dimly lit main lobby, sitting directly in front of the massive stone fireplace, quietly feeding split oak logs into the roaring flames. Sarah, the dedicated general manager of the lodge, walked out of the back office carrying 2 steaming mugs of hot apple cider. Sarah had worked faithfully alongside my grandmother for over 10 years. She was a tough, resilient, no-nonsense woman in her late 40s who had originally fled to the mountains after surviving a nightmare divorce and a highly toxic, drawn-out custody battle over her 2 teenage kids. When Sarah had nowhere else to turn, my grandmother had given her a steady job, a warm bed, and a safe place to completely rebuild her shattered life. Sarah handed me a warm mug and sat down heavily in the leather armchair across from me. She looked completely exhausted, dark circles prominent under her eyes. The roof patch in cabin 4 is holding up against the wind, Sarah said, staring blankly into the dancing fire. But we are definitely going to need to replace the entire metal flashing in the spring. That is, if either of us still have a job here in the spring. You will always have a job here, Sarah, I said firmly, taking a sip of the hot cider. She offered a weak, incredibly sad smile. Josh, I am not stupid. I saw your brother marching around the perimeter of the property yesterday with a laser rangefinder while you were down in town buying supplies. I know exactly what corporate developers look like when they are actively sizing up a teardown project. If your dad gets his hands on this property deed tomorrow morning, he will fire me before lunch and have the bulldozers rolling up the mountain by the end of the month. I gripped the warm ceramic mug tightly. I won't let that happen. I swear to you. How? Sarah asked gently, her voice full of genuine concern. Your dad is a financial shark. He has expensive corporate lawyers on retainer. He has endless money. If the will divides this place up equally between the family members, he will absolutely force a hostile buyout. You cannot fight a guy like Richard in a brutal war of attrition. He will drag you through the courts and bleed you dry until you surrender. I didn't have a confident answer for her. Inside, I was terrified that she was entirely right. I knew without a doubt that my grandmother loved me, but I also knew she was deeply traditional. It was entirely possible she left the property to my father, assuming he would eventually do the honorable thing. Right at that heavy moment, my cell phone buzzed loudly on the wooden coffee table. The brightly lit screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated for a second, then picked it up and answered. Hello, Joshua? Is that you? It's Aunt Martha. I sat up completely straight, almost spilling my drink. Aunt Martha was my father's younger sister. She was a notoriously quiet, timid woman who always nervously agreed with whatever my father commanded. I hadn't spoken a single word to her since the night I was kicked out. Aunt Martha? It's late. Are you okay? Her voice was trembling violently over the line, speaking in a rushed, terrified whisper, like she was deathly afraid of being overheard by someone in her house. Listen to me, Joshua. I do not have much time to talk. I cannot sit back and let Richard do this to you. Not after everything Eleanor confided in me. Do what to me? What exactly is going on, Martha? Your father? Martha cried softly, her breath hitching in panic. He is not the successful man he pretends to be right now. The investment firm, he made incredibly bad decisions. Terribly bad investments on margin. He leveraged absolutely everything he owns. The suburban house, his massive retirement savings, the cars. Elijah is deeply involved in it too. They are drowning Joshua. They are drowning in millions of dollars of debt. And they are desperately looking at your grandmother's lodge as their final life raft. My mind raced furiously, trying to process the information. Wait, the rented Porsche? The custom suits. It is all smoke and mirrors. Martha sobbed quietly. It is all leased and rented to keep up appearances, so his aggressive creditors don't panic and seize his assets. They desperately need that lodge. They already have a corporate buyer lined up to purchase the land. Be careful tomorrow morning, Joshua. Do whatever you legally have to do to protect yourself. He will completely destroy you to save his own skin. The phone line went abruptly dead. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. The fire popped loudly and hissed in the stone hearth. Suddenly, every confusing detail clicked perfectly into place. The sudden, uninvited appearance at the funeral. The exaggerated, fake grief. Elijah's desperate, panicked phone call on the snowy deck. They were not sitting in that lawyer's office out of mere greed. They were sitting there out of absolute, terrifying desperation. I looked up at Sarah. The deep fear in my chest vanished completely, instantly replaced by a cold, hard, unshakable clarity. Go get some sleep, Sarah, I said, standing up and placing my mug on the table. Nobody is bringing bulldozers to this mountain. I promise you that. This brings us right back to Mr. Sterling's office, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a hunting knife. The lawyer deliberately cleared his throat, his sharp eyes scanning the room from over the rim of his glasses. My parents leaned so far forward in their leather chairs they were practically falling out of them. Elijah had finally stopped tapping his restless foot. You could hear a pin drop in that suffocating space. To the primary asset, Mr. Sterling read again, his voice strong, formal, and completely unwavering. The Pine Ridge Mountain Lodge, the surrounding 70 acres of commercial land, and all associated business accounts. My father nervously licked his dry lips. He looked like a starving man ready to jump across the mahogany desk and grab the parchment paper himself. I, Eleanor Vance, the lawyer continued reading aloud, do hereby leave the entirety of this property, 100% ownership and control, to my grandson Joshua Vance. For a split second, nobody in the room dared to breathe. Then, my father exhaled a sharp, loud breath and forced a wide, incredibly tight smile onto his face. He nodded slowly, aggressively slapping his hands down on his knees. Well, that certainly makes sense. Bypassing the middle generation for estate tax purposes. Very smart of mother. Highly strategic financial planning. My mother smiled politely at me, though her eyes were darting nervously around the room. Yes, of course. Congratulations, Joshua. We are so incredibly proud of you. And exactly like we said in the car earlier, we can all work together from here. Elijah can immediately step in as the chief financial officer. Your father can handle the complex development contracts, and you can comfortably stay on as the property manager. Elijah leaned back confidently, crossing his arms over his chest. Yeah, little bro, we will get this old place modernized in no time. I've already got some highly connected guys looking at the commercial zoning permits. They were attempting to do exactly what Sarah had predicted the night before. They were trying to completely steamroll me. They arrogant assumed that simply because I was the quiet, compliant kid they violently kicked out 13 years ago, I would just obediently hand over the keys the second they applied psychological pressure. Mr. Sterling did not react to their relentless chatter. He simply raised a single hand in the air to demand absolute silence. I am not finished reading, Mr. Sterling said sharply. My father instantly stopped talking. The fake, confident smile slipped just a fraction of an inch from his face. What exactly do you mean, Arthur? You just read the primary beneficiary. There is, Mr. Sterling said, lowering the document and looking dead into my father's eyes. A final clause attached to this inheritance. A strict, legally binding condition of ownership. The room grew so intensely quiet I could hear the old radiator humming aggressively in the corner. Mr. Sterling meticulously adjusted his glasses and read the final paragraph very slowly, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal, undeniable precision. The Pine Ridge Lodge may not be transferred, sold, or entered into any shared ownership, partnership, or management agreement with any individual who has previously severed familial ties with the inheritor. For a long, agonizing moment, the words just hung suspended in the stale office air. The legal phrasing was undeniably dense, but the core meaning was a hollow-point bullet fired straight into their chests. My mother inhaled sharply, violently grabbing her designer bag. What on earth does that mean, Arthur? Mr. Sterling calmly looked up from the parchment paper. He deliberately closed the thick manila folder. It means, Susan, that the property must remain solely and exclusively under Joshua's control. Furthermore, if Joshua attempts to sell the property or hire, partner with, or distribute a single cent of profits to any relative who previously disowned or expelled him from the family, specifically naming you, Richard, and Elijah, the entire estate will be immediately liquidated and all funds donated directly to the State Forestry Department. You get absolutely nothing. You can never, ever get anything. Silence. Absolute, crushing, devastating silence violently filled the room. My father's expression changed first. The arrogant, overbearing confidence drained out of his face so fast he literally looked like he was going to pass out in the chair. The healthy color completely left his cheeks. A thick blue vein in his forehead throbbed aggressively. That is very specific, he stammered weakly. Yes, Mr. Sterling replied calmly, folding his hands on the desk. Eleanor was quite clear when she drafted this exact document 5 years ago. She anticipated this exact scenario playing out. My mother openly stared at the wooden table, her perfectly manicured hands shaking uncontrollably. So we can't even. She couldn't physically finish the sentence. No shared business arrangements of any kind, Mr. Sterling confirmed loudly, driving the final nail deep into the coffin. No ownership partnerships. No corporate loans against the property value. The asset is entirely ironclad. Elijah abruptly jumped out of his chair, his face turning a dark, furious shade of red. This is absolute bullshit. She was completely out of her mind. We will contest it. We will tie this up in probate court for the next 10 years. Josh, I swear to God. Sit down, Elijah, Mr. Sterling snapped. His authoritative voice cracked through the room like a bullwhip. I have multiple high-definition video recordings of Eleanor taking extensive psychiatric evaluations on the exact day she signed this document. 3 independent medical doctors legally certified her mental fitness. I possess sworn affidavits from multiple witnesses documenting your father aggressively kicking Joshua out of his home. If you attempt to challenge this in court, you will lose spectacularly, and the ensuing legal fees will permanently bankrupt you. The heavy finality of it settled across the room like a suffocating blanket. There was no argument to be made. There was no negotiation to be had. Just a massive, indestructible legal wall built by a brilliant grandmother who saw right through their pathetic greed. I looked directly at my father. He sat back slowly in his chair, his proud posture entirely collapsing. He looked incredibly old. He looked completely defeated. She thought that far ahead. My father whispered quietly to himself, staring blankly at the floor. She did, I said, speaking clearly for the first time since the reading began. I stood up from my chair. I looked down at the 3 of them, feeling absolutely no fear. The power dynamic had permanently shifted. The authority truly belonged to me. She knew exactly who you were, Richard, and so do I. You are not getting a single dime. Do not ever come to my mountain again. This is the exact moment that changed absolutely everything, when I finally took back total control of my life. Thank you for being so patient and staying with me until now. You are truly amazing. Please help me like the video and comment number 1 below, so I know you've been on this incredible journey with me. This not only helps more people find this story, but also lets me know my experiences matter to someone out there. Your support is my biggest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I turned my back on them and walked straight out of Mr. Sterling's office without looking back for a single second. The heavy oak door clicked shut loudly behind me, sounding exactly like a massive steel vault locking forever. The air in the hallway instantly felt lighter. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs completely for the first time in what felt like weeks. I walked purposefully down the carpeted stairs and forcefully pushed open the heavy glass front doors of the building. The freezing, sharp mountain air hit my face, feeling incredibly clean and pure. The snow had started to fall heavily again, thick white flurries rapidly dusting the cars parked in the icy lot. Less than a minute later, the front doors banged open violently behind me. My parents and Elijah burst out into the biting cold. The polished, sophisticated, wealthy act they had maintained for decades was completely gone. They looked exactly like desperate rats trapped in the hull of a rapidly sinking ship. My mother was crying hysterically now, actual genuine tears streaming down her face, aggressively clutching my father's coat sleeve. "Richard, what are we going to do? What in God's name are we going to tell the bank on Monday?" My father shook her off roughly, his face twisted in panic. He looked entirely frantic. He marched quickly toward his shiny rented Porsche, desperately pulling his keys out of his overcoat pocket. His hands were shaking so violently from the cold and the adrenaline that he dropped the keys directly into the freezing gray slush. I stood quietly by my old, reliable Ford truck, watching the pathetic, chaotic scene unfold. "It's officially over, Richard," I said loudly, my voice carrying easily over the howling wind. He froze instantly, kneeling awkwardly in the wet snow, and slowly looked up at me. The carefully constructed mask was completely shattered. Aunt Martha was entirely right. The broken man looking up at me was not a wealthy, powerful investment banker. He was a desperate, drowning fraud who had arrogantly gambled everything he owned and lost it all. "You simply do not understand, Joshua," my father pleaded desperately. His voice cracked pathetically. The suffocating arrogance was completely replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. "I desperately need that property. My firm, the SEC, is actively looking into my restricted accounts. I am massively over-leveraged. If I don't show the commercial bank a major, tangible asset by the end of the month, they are foreclosing on the house. They are seizing my entire retirement. I will have absolutely nothing left." "You have Elijah," I said coldly, glancing over at my brother. "The brilliant golden child, the highly paid junior executive. Surely he can write a check and bail you out." Elijah was pacing erratically next to the passenger side of the Porsche, his face completely pale. Right at that exact moment, his cell phone rang loudly. In the quiet, snowy parking lot, the obnoxious ringtone was incredibly loud. He pulled it out of his pocket, looked at the caller ID on the screen, and swore violently. "It's Vance," Elijah muttered frantically to my father, his eyes wide with fear. "The corporate developer. He wants the signed contract for the lodge today." "What the hell do I tell him?" "Tell him the absolute truth," I said, walking slowly over to them. I stood mere inches from Elijah. He didn't look so big, wealthy, and intimidating anymore. He looked exactly like a terrified, cornered kid. "Tell him the real estate deal is completely dead. Tell him you do not own the dirt you walk on." Elijah glared at me fiercely, his trembling finger hovering over the red reject button on the screen. "You are making a massive, stupid mistake, Josh. You do not know how to run a multimillion-dollar business. You're going to lose it all to the bank anyway." "Maybe I will," I said, my voice completely calm. "But I absolutely won't lose it to you." My father slowly stood up from the slush, numbly brushing the dirty, wet snow off the knees of his expensive tailored pants. He looked hopelessly toward the towering mountains, toward where the beautiful lodge sat safely hidden in the tall pines. He looked back at me, finally realizing that he had absolutely zero leverage left. He had callously thrown away his own son purely for pride, and now that toxic pride was going to leave him completely homeless. "Well," my father said finally, his voice barely a weak whisper in the wind. I suppose you have got a lot to think about. No, I replied, grabbing the frozen handle and opening the door to my truck. I don't have to think about anything at all. I got in, turned the key, and the old Ford engine roared immediately to life. As I backed slowly out of the parking space, I looked at the three of them one last time through the falling snow. 3 miserable, broken people standing in the freezing cold next to a rented luxury car they could no longer afford to drive. I put the truck in drive and confidently headed toward the mountain road. The winding road that led up to the lodge curved beautifully through the dense forest. The exact same snowy road my grandmother had driven down to pick me up years ago when I had absolutely nothing in the world. For the first time since the brutal meeting began, the inheritance didn't feel like money or land or property. Felt like something entirely else. Felt like impenetrable armor. My grandmother had reached out from beyond the grave, wrapped her loving arms around me one last time, and permanently protected me from the monsters. Exactly 1 full year has passed since that freezing Tuesday morning in Arthur Sterling's law office. A lot can happen in 365 days when you are finally free from the suffocating, crushing weight of a toxic family. The winter hit the mountains incredibly hard this year, dropping over 4 feet of pristine white snow across the valley in a single week. But unlike the brutal, terrifying winter when I was 19 years old, shivering in a rusted car with no money and nowhere to go, this winter felt completely different. This winter felt incredibly warm. I was standing on the wide, wrap-around wooden porch of the Pine Ridge Lodge, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, watching the golden morning sun slowly rise over the jagged, ice-covered peaks. The air was razor-sharp and smelled fiercely of crushed pine needles and the rich wood smoke pouring from the stone chimneys of our fully booked guest cabins. We did not just survive the past year. We completely thrived. Without the looming, paralyzing threat of my father's expensive corporate lawyers constantly trying to steal the land, I was finally able to take a deep breath and get to real work. I took the massive revenue from our incredibly busy summer season and poured every single cent directly back into the property. We did not hire some faceless corporate developer like my brother wanted. We hired local contractors. We completely replaced the aging, leaky roof on cabin 4, exactly like Sarah had worried about that night by the fire. We expanded the main dining room, installing massive floor-to-ceiling thermal windows so the guests could stay warm and watch the heavy snow fall over the deep valley while they ate their hot breakfast. More importantly, I took care of the people who had taken care of me and my grandmother. I gave Sarah a massive, well-deserved promotion. She went from being the general manager to the official director of operations for the entire estate. I permanently doubled her salary. For the very first time since her brutal, emotionally draining divorce and that absolute nightmare of a custody battle over her 2 teenage kids, Sarah was finally able to breathe easily. She took that new salary and bought a beautiful, sturdy little house down in the main town for her and her children. She did not have to constantly look over her shoulder anymore, terrified of expensive legal fees. We were a real, highly functional team. We built a family out of respect, not just blood. As for my biological family down in the city, the universe decided to deliver a masterclass in absolute, undeniable karma. Aunt Martha called me back in the early spring, right as the snow was beginning to melt off the lower trails. She spoke in a normal, clear voice over the phone, no longer terrified of being overheard by my overbearing father. The ugly truth of their financial ruin had become entirely public knowledge in their wealthy social circles. The commercial bank aggressively foreclosed on my parents' massive, pristine suburban mansion just 3 short weeks after the will reading. The rented midnight blue Porsche Panamera was quickly and embarrassingly repossessed right out of their perfectly paved driveway in broad daylight. The cutthroat investment firm my father worked for brought in external auditors. They quickly discovered his highly fraudulent, massively over-leveraged margin accounts. He was permanently stripped of his senior executive title, his corner office, and his dignity. He was forced into an early, completely disgraced retirement just to narrowly avoid federal prosecution by the SEC. He and my mother were aggressively evicted. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the loud, industrial outskirts of the city. My mother had to swallow her massive pride and sell all her expensive designer handbags and jewelry just to keep the electricity turned on and buy groceries. My older brother, Elijah, did not fare any better. When his massive, secret real estate deal with Mr. Vance completely collapsed because I held the deed to the inheritance, Elijah panicked. He foolishly tried to shift the blame and aggressively threatened to sue the powerful developer for breach of a verbal contract. In swift response, Mr. Vance's ruthless corporate lawyers absolutely destroyed him. They directly contacted Elijah's finance firm, exposing his highly unethical attempts to broker shady backroom land deals on company time. The undisputed golden child of the family was immediately fired from his prestigious junior analyst role. His highly anticipated promotion was completely revoked. His massive bonuses vanished into thin air. The last Aunt Martha heard, Elijah was working a miserable, low-paying entry-level sales job making cold calls, driving a beat-up used sedan, entirely cut off from the wealthy, elite social circles he used to proudly dominate. My father had once threatened to completely drain my college fund if I did not blindly obey his strict commands. Now, his own massive retirement fund was completely wiped out by his own blinding greed. They gambled their own flesh and blood for a quick corporate payout, and they lost absolutely everything. Despite all the incredible, life-changing success at the Mountain Lodge, there was one deeply personal, highly emotional task I had been entirely avoiding for the entire year. I had not stepped a single foot inside my grandmother's private bedroom on the ground floor of the main cabin. I simply was not ready to face the overwhelming memories. The grief of losing her was still too raw, too incredibly heavy. But on a very quiet Tuesday afternoon, with the lodge completely empty of guests who had all gone cross-country skiing, I finally walked into the back office and took the heavy brass key from the metal lockbox on the wall. I walked slowly down the quiet, carpeted hallway and stood in front of her heavy wooden door. I took a deep, shaky breath, inserted the brass key, and slowly unlocked the door. The room was exactly as she had left it on the day she passed away. The air inside was perfectly still, smelling faintly of dried purple lavender, old paper, and her favorite vanilla soap. The bright afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the white lace curtains, illuminating the tiny dust motes dancing in the quiet air. Her beautiful, colorful handmade quilt was still folded perfectly at the foot of her antique, solid oak four-poster bed. I spent 4 incredibly emotional hours quietly organizing her personal belongings. I carefully packed her vintage wool sweaters and dresses into heavy cedar boxes to donate to the local women's shelter down in the valley. I sorted through decades of faded photographs, smiling at the pictures of her building the lodge from the ground up. I was on my hands and knees, emptying the very bottom drawer of her heavy oak vanity desk, when I suddenly noticed something strange. The wooden panel at the very back of the deep drawer felt slightly loose when my knuckles brushed against it. I stopped moving. I pressed my fingers firmly against the dark wood and pushed upward. The wooden panel popped out with a sharp, loud click. Hidden entirely out of sight, tucked deep inside a cleverly designed secret compartment, was a beautifully polished mahogany box secured with a small, intricate brass latch. My heart started beating a little faster in my chest. I carefully reached into the dark space and pulled the heavy wooden box out into the sunlight. I placed it gently on top of the vanity desk and slowly unfastened the cold brass latch. I opened the heavy lid. Inside, resting carefully on a bed of dark green velvet, was a thick, black leather-bound journal and a sealed, heavy parchment envelope with my name, Joshua, written beautifully across the front in my grandmother's elegant, sweeping handwriting. I pulled the heavy wooden chair away from the desk and sat down. My hands were visibly shaking as I reached out and opened the black leather journal. I expected to find a daily diary of her thoughts, maybe some old recipes or gardening notes. I was completely wrong. It was a diary, but not of her daily mountain life. It was a meticulous, heavily researched, highly detailed financial record spanning the last 5 entire years. I turned the crisp, yellowing pages, reading the handwritten entries in absolute, stunned shock. Grandma Eleanor had not just been sitting quietly on this mountain baking fresh bread and chatting with tourists. She had actively hired a highly skilled private investigator and a forensic accountant down in the city. She possessed a complete, undeniably detailed paper trail of my father's catastrophic, high-risk financial failures. She had exact copies of the public financial liens placed against his massive suburban house. She had detailed, handwritten notes carefully tracking Elijah's shady, highly unethical meetings with corporate real estate developers, including the exact dates, times, and locations he had secretly met with Mr. Vance. She knew absolutely everything. She watched them slowly, arrogantly dig their own financial graves from 100 miles away, and she meticulously documented every single shovel full of dirt. I found a specific entry dated exactly 1 week before she sat down in Arthur Sterling's law office to finalize her ironclad will. The dark blue ink was pressed incredibly deeply into the paper, showing her quiet, focused fury. "Richard foolishly thinks I am just a blind, foolish old woman," she wrote in strong, sharp letters. "He thinks he can recklessly bleed his own clients dry, completely ruin his own son's life, and then arrogantly march up my mountain and steal the only safe sanctuary Joshua has left just to save his own pathetic, inflated ego. He is an absolute coward. I will build a terrifying legal fortress around this mountain property. I will build it so high and so incredibly thick that Richard and his arrogant golden boy will permanently break their teeth trying to bite into it. They will never touch my boy again." Hot tears rapidly welled up in my eyes, blurring the ink on the page. She had spent the last 5 years of her long life aggressively, secretly orchestrating an impenetrable legal shield just to permanently protect me from the greedy monsters she had unfortunately raised. I put the heavy leather journal down gently on the desk and picked up the sealed parchment envelope. I carefully slid my trembling thumb under the flap, breaking the wax seal, and pulled out the folded letter. "My dearest Joshua," the letter began, "if you are sitting in my room reading this, it means the dust has finally settled. It means Arthur Sterling did his job perfectly. The greedy wolves have been completely starved out of the woods, and this mountain finally belongs entirely, safely to you. I know you have carried a terrible, incredibly heavy emotional wound since you were 19 years old. I saw the absolute, crushing devastation in your eyes the freezing night you drove through that blinding blizzard to reach my front door. Your father completely broke your young heart, and your mother cowardly stood by the kitchen sink and watched him do it without saying a single word. I never pushed you to talk about it because I knew you desperately needed the quiet time to heal your own shattered pride. But I want you to know the absolute, undeniable truth today. You were never the failure, Joshua. You were the only person in that cold, sterile house who possessed a genuine, beautiful soul. Richard built his entire pathetic life on the fragile, crumbling foundation of other people's opinions, expensive cars, and stolen money. Elijah followed him right into the dark, chasing meaningless promotions and hollow titles. They are completely hollow men. Do not ever, for a single second, let their cruel rejection make you question your own profound, incredible worth. The universe has a powerful, beautiful way of balancing the scales. By the time you read this letter, the legal trap I carefully set will have sprung flawlessly, and they will be forced to face the brutal, terrifying reality of their own selfish actions. They wanted to steal your inheritance to pay for their sins, but I made sure their sins cost them everything. I leave you this mountain lodge not just as a highly profitable business, but as a permanent, unbreakable sanctuary. Protect the ancient pine trees. Protect Sarah and the wonderful people who work hard for you every single day. Above all else, protect your own inner peace. Remember this one undeniable truth, my sweet boy. Do not ever let blood become heavy chains around your neck. True family are the people who actively choose to stand firmly by your side when the bitter winter wind blows, not the people who cruelly push you out into the freezing storm and lock the door behind you. I am so incredibly, deeply proud of the strong, kind man you have become. The mountain is officially yours now. Stand tall. Look out over the valley and know you earned every single piece of it. All my love, forever and always, Grandma Eleanor. I sat perfectly still in the quiet, sunlit room, clutching the heavy parchment letter tightly to my chest, and I finally let myself completely break down. I cried for the scared, shivering 19-year-old boy who actually believed he was totally worthless. I cried for the incredible, fierce, brilliant woman who loved me enough to wage a silent, flawless war on my behalf. And then, after a long time, I slowly wiped my face, folded the letter safely into my front chest pocket, and stood up from the chair. The heavy, lingering ghost of my painful past was entirely, permanently gone. The very next morning, I woke up long before the sun crested the mountains. I pulled on my heavy leather work boots, grabbed my thick, lined wool jacket, and walked out the heavy glass front doors of the Pine Ridge Lodge. The early winter air was absolutely bracing, incredibly sharp and pure as it filled my lungs. The massive sky above the valley was slowly shifting from a deep, bruised purple into a brilliant, fiery orange and bright pink as the morning sun confidently rose over the eastern timber ridge. I walked slowly down the wooden front steps, my boots crunching loudly in the fresh, untouched snow, and stood right in the center of the plowed driveway. I turned around and looked up at the massive, beautiful log cabin my grandmother had so lovingly built. The lodge was completely alive. It was a living, breathing entity filled with incredible warmth, laughter, and genuine purpose. I could smell the rich, dark roast coffee brewing strongly in the busy commercial kitchen. Through the large, frost-rimmed glass windows of the lobby, I could see Sarah standing confidently at the polished wooden front desk, laughing loudly and genuinely at a story a visiting guest had just told her. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar, heavy crunch of large tires rolling over the packed snow. Mrs. Higgins, the cheerful local baker, pulled her white delivery truck right up to the back kitchen doors. She jumped out, carrying massive, steaming metal trays of fresh sourdough bread and warm cinnamon rolls that made the entire freezing courtyard smell exactly like heaven. I stood there in the freezing mountain cold, surrounded by the towering, silent pine trees, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of absolute, untouchable freedom. The official financial appraisal value of the property sitting safely inside Mr. Sterling's locked, fireproof filing cabinet down in the city stated this land was worth exactly $1.9 million. But standing right there, watching the thick white smoke curl peacefully from the stone chimneys, knowing my dedicated staff was well paid, happy, and entirely safe, knowing the aggressive corporate developers would never be allowed to touch a single pine tree in this ancient forest, I realized the true, actual value was entirely unquantifiable. You cannot put a price tag on peace. I did not just inherit a piece of valuable commercial real estate from Grandma Eleanor. I inherited my entire life. I took back the raw power and the self-respect that was so violently, cruelly stolen from me in that pristine, sterile suburban kitchen exactly 13 years ago. My father had confidently, arrogantly looked me dead in the eye and told me I would be a total, miserable failure without his dirty money, his elite connections, and his fake prestige. He was entirely, fundamentally wrong. I built a massive, deeply fulfilling, beautiful life right out of the hard dirt, the chopped wood, and the freezing snow. This incredible, chaotic journey taught me a very hard, often painful, but absolutely necessary lesson, and I want to share it directly with you right now. Society constantly pushes this incredibly dangerous, highly toxic narrative that family is absolutely everything, no matter what. We are constantly told from a young age to forgive and forget the worst kinds of abuse. We are heavily pressured by society to keep giving endless, exhausting second chances to the people who happen to share our DNA, no matter how terribly, selfishly, or cruelly they treat us behind closed doors. But listen to me very carefully. Blood does not automatically grant someone a permanent, VIP all-access pass to your life, your hard-earned success, or your precious mental health. Loyalty, mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine care are what truly make a real family. Setting firm, completely unbreakable boundaries with highly toxic parents or narcissistic, greedy siblings is not an act of cruelty or rebellion. It is an absolute act of fundamental self-preservation. When people show you exactly who they are, when they measure your human worth strictly by your bank account or your job title, when they cold-heartedly cast you aside the second you stop playing their rigged, manipulative game, You have the absolute right to pack your bags and walk away. You have the right to build your own safe sanctuary far away from their chaos. Sometimes, the most painful, devastating rejection you ever experience is actually the universe fiercely protecting you. It is the universe aggressively pushing you out of a burning building so you can go plant your own strong, healthy roots somewhere beautiful and safe. This is the end of my story, but it is just the beautiful beginning of my real, authentic life on this mountain. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for walking this incredible, difficult, emotional journey with me all the way to the end. Please, do me a favor and drop down into the comments right now and tell me your thoughts. What is the most powerful, resonant lesson you are taking away from my grandmother's brilliant story? How have you successfully handled deeply toxic people or family members in your own life? Or, if you simply want to show your support for the journey, just comment the word good below, so I know you truly appreciate the deep, educational lessons this story brought to light today. Your engagement and your stories mean the absolute world to me. Stay strong, aggressively protect your peace, always know your worth, and I will see you all in the next one.